On this episode of Into the Unknown, I am joined with Ben Fossen. Ben and I actually connected on Instagram. Ben is the chairman of the board and co founder of Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots. As many or some of you may know, I was adopted from Guatemala as well, and it was a great opportunity to talk with Ben, see what his wonderful organization is up to, and just connecting another part of that story, of that chapter of not only my life but his life as well. So let's just jump into it. Today on Into the Unknown, I am with a really special guest, my good friend Ben Fossen. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm good. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here and
I
thanks for having
really
me on the show.
appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. We have a very good connection, and I'm just excited to get into it. I want to know your origin story. Think about that comic book episode number one. Who are you and where are you from?
Yeah. Yeah. So as you mentioned, Jeremy, yeah, we do have share kind of unique situation in life. So I was adopted from Guatemala as well. And I was born in 1990 in Guatemala City. And at 4 months old, I was adopted to a family in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, which is where I grew up for until I was about 25.
What was life like living in Minnesota? Of course, we definitely can, I think, relate on the fact that in the Midwest sometimes people from Guatemala don't stick out a little more than others.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely something I've thought about more, like as I've gotten older, just what it was like to grow up. Uh, but yeah, there's not many Guatemalans in Minnesota, or I'm sure in Wisconsin either. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of just an experience of, you know, being the only Guatemalan or even like the only non-white person almost everywhere I went, whether that was at school, at church, or just like in the neighborhood I lived in. And you know, I think I had a good childhood. Like, I really have a great relationship with my parents, and I think they did they're great parents. But that's something that I think as a kid, it's something that I always picked up on. I always realized, and as a child, it's kind of hard to know what to do with that. But I think as an adult, I'm kind of starting to unpack that a bit more and really understand what that meant. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I would say like also like I would say I always had an interest in Guatemala, but I don't think that really took off until I was older. I went back to Guatemala for the first time when I was 16, and that kind of just ignited this desire to find out more about the country. Prior to that, I think I was always curious. My parents would send buy books and bring buy Guatemalan fabrics or kind of just little trinkets from the country. But I wasn't really that interested, and I also think they tried to teach me Spanish, and I was like vehemently against it. Which I kind of wish that I had learned more as a child. It's a lot harder to learn as an
Ben, I
adult.
love everything you said. I can completely relate. My parents did a great job of raising me. Also trying to bring the culture where they could in learning Spanish, being part of groups like that. And I think you mentioned that as a kid you don't really know how to articulate that kind of feeling or that understanding that I am different. I don't 100% know I know where I'm from. My parents told me, but understanding kind of how that really plays in. I was fortunate going to the Milwaukee Public Museum. They had a Guatemalan marketplace, and for me, who eventually became a historian, a curator, an archivist, it was the first time I saw myself in history, which really sparked that knowledge, that desire to learn more about the country. But I feel like I put that on the bookshelf for quite a while until I would say until I got older.
Oh, that's really cool. You're able to connect through the exhibits at the museum.
It's one of those things that I think it became a driving force to for me. I don't think I could have articulated that even at 22, but to show and find and share the stories of people who maybe those people who aren't represented as often or as well in history. And so it was one of those areas. But I want to get back to you. So when did you start really starting to take interest in being from Guatemala? You mentioned you had visited there. What kind of trip was that like?
Yeah, so I can't remember. I was either 16 or 17, but I went with my parents and then my three younger siblings. So I'm the only one adopted from Guatemala. I have three younger siblings, and we went for, I think it was a 3 week, yeah, I think it was about a 3 week trip. We kind of just did all the touristy things. We went to Guatemala City for a couple of days. We mainly focused on Antigua, going to the Panachal at the lake, and then up to the Mayan ruins in Tikal up north. And I think, for me, that it really, Guatemala was a bit of an abstract thing. I had met a couple Guatemalans here and there, in Minnesota. Anytime, my mom came in contact with the Guatemalan, she really wanted me to meet them. But, it was just really hard to, really understand what that meant to be Guatemalan or what that looked like until I saw it in person. And I think that really just kind of ignited that desire to want to know more about the country and about the people. Just seeing, it's a beautiful country, and just like encountering all the just kind and wonderful people that live there, uh, I think was a big part of it. So I think that was a big thing. And then, I share kind of your love for sports as well. I'm a huge soccer fan, and I was 16. Well, yeah, I was 16 back in the 2006 World Cup, and that's kind of the first time I started playing soccer pretty competitively, and I discovered the Guatemalan national team, and I would follow them like every game that they had, like the stats, and that kind of just was my window into Guatemala for the next couple years. Yeah, I mean it's still a big part of my journey now. I probably watch I do watch almost every single match that they play still, and it's been a huge part of my journey. And I've actually had the opportunity to work on a project with FEDAFOOT, so the Guatemalan Football Federation, more recently. But yeah, I would say through soccer, that was a huge part. And you know, I would watch the games by myself, for many years. But then I also connected with a group of Guatemalans who had an online forum, and I'm still friends with some of these guys, almost 15 years later. We've moved on from online forums to some group chats now, but they're kind of just fanatics about the Guatemalan national team, and we just talk about the players and just how the team's doing. So those are kind of just how I started getting connected and really wanting to know more about the country.
I'm a sports historian by trade. I worked at the College Football Hall and the Pro Football Hall of Fames. And I always tell people you don't understand how much sports can really connect people that maybe are different or maybe from the same place. But I'm sure when you're watching those games, you're thinking your friends, you're thinking of people you know. Of course, you're cheering on your team, but I realize when it becomes your national team, when you do see a Guatemalan flag, whether it's proper football or just in general, I feel that excitement, and I definitely feel you there.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of power in sports. This kind of reminded me of the first question you asked me. I did meet a couple Guatemalans growing up, but almost instantly, like I don't speak. I mean, I didn't speak Spanish then. I speak Spanish now, but I speak with an accent, like an American accent. Like it's clear, like it's not my first language, even though we kind of look like people who should be able to speak Spanish. I'm sure you've probably encountered that where you've gone to a restaurant or somebody's walked up to you and
Yes,
they've
and it's
started
quick
speaking
Spanish,
Spanish,
and it's Spanish like
and
they know
they
me.
quickly realize that.
So it's one of those things you just kind of smile, and
Yeah,
then they're like, ah, okay, he's a he's a gringo.
yeah, yeah. So I definitely experienced that a couple times growing up. Well, one of the cool things I found about, and I think why soccer has been and continues to be such a passion of mine, especially the Guatemalan national team, is that these guys that I connected with, and some of them are scouts for the Guatemalan national team now. They didn't really care that I didn't speak Spanish. They were fine to speak in English, or even if they would teach me some of the Spanish words when they would speak in Spanish on their forums or in their group chats. But at the end of the day, it kind of didn't matter. Like what they cared about is that you cared about the national team, and sports can really kind of unite you in a way. And like I think it's how the first time like I felt like I was Guatemalan, even though I may not be able to speak the language or know a lot about the culture.
And I love that you said that. So I want to continue this conversation. So in life, we all make choices, make decisions. If we had the blueprint laid out for us, and we knew to go from step A, you need to go do step B to C, all the way through Z. I think a lot of us would take it because it would be a path we'd know the exact outcomes. Of course, we know life doesn't actually work like that. So my question for you is, when did you come to a fork in the road or a decision you had to make that either changed your life one way or the other?
So this was more recent. This was about 3.5, 4 years ago now. I had, myself and four other friends decided to start this nonprofit called Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots. We're all adopted from Guatemala. We kind of saw that we kind of were discovering that there was a lot of kids that were adopted from Guatemala. In fact, there's about 50,000 children worldwide, primarily living in Canada and the United States, that were adopted. And we all have kind of the same experiences of not having that connection back to the country, not speaking Spanish, but wanting to have a sense of community, having all these questions that we've kind of talked about here, and many more. You know, Starting a nonprofit was not in, I think, any of our plans. It definitely was not in my plan. Uh, I had a had been an entrepreneur. Had helped start a tech startup two tech startups in my early 20s. And something that I really wanted to do was either get into another tech startup, or create an investment fund. Those were kind of the things that I was thinking about, really kind of working towards. So this idea to start a nonprofit was kind of just out of the blue, but we saw the need. We saw that there was so many other people who were having the same questions, but we also saw the potential that we could help the country of Guatemala. Um, so yeah, I would say kind of that was that moment for me. It's definitely been a life changing experience. I didn't know a single thing about running a nonprofit, so I am now the president of our board, and still am quite involved in the day to day. But we now have an executive director, and there's some volunteers and staff, and it's the organization's running quite well and growing. But yeah, none of us had any clue how to register a nonprofit, how to do any of that. So it was very much learning by doing and figuring it out as we go. And yeah, I mean, it's been a wild ride the last 3 years. You know, Getting to work with the Guatemalan Soccer Federation, meeting the president of Guatemala, and being able to get some services approved for Guatemalan adoptees. Uh, yeah, definitely one of those experiences where kind of went out on the limb, had no idea where this was going to go, and really glad I did. Was not in the plans, and that's just sometimes how life goes.
Love how you said that. It's just how life. Sometimes it's how life goes. You don't really know. I'll be honest. You don't really know what you're doing half the time in life, and I've learned it's just keep making what you think is the right decision. And I think a lot of times those cards keep falling. I'm just got to do. I got to register my nonprofit. Okay, now we need this. Now we need to make sure we are tax exempt. Now we need to, this, X, Y, and Z. And so I just appreciate your determination on that. And, that's no easy feat to handle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said from learning from doing.
Completely agree. So my last question before I get you out of here is the title of the podcast, Into the Unknown. What is your unknown currently? What are you stepping into? What are you looking ahead to?
So, I mean, we have a lot of really exciting projects at Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots. And, as an organization, I want to keep helping to lead and expand that. And, we want to, expand the programs that we have. But one thing that, for me is really the unknown. And I wrote a paper about this topic about 2 years ago, and I've been trying to figure out ways to implement it. And kind of the topic of the paper is Guatemalan adoptees, we're all citizens of Guatemala. We are able to obtain passports. We can vote in Guatemalan elections. And Guatemala is a country that it's an emerging country. It has it needs a lot of things from the economy is not the strongest. It needs modernization there. It's lacking well-educated people. Being an entrepreneur there is very difficult. And one thing I noticed, and I have a background in as an entrepreneur, an investor, and an engineer, was that Guatemalan adoptees, we have a lot of skills. Because of the high cost of adoption in the 80s, 90s, and especially in the 2000s, the families that could afford to adopt are typically middle class, upper middle class, and wealthy Americans. And we've been given college educations. We've been taught a lot of skills that Guatemalans typically, a lot of Guatemalan citizens don't have, and opportunities. And what potential could be done there as dual citizens to help a country that it is our country. We can hold office there. We can represent the national team in sports. Uh, yeah, what ways can we bridge that gap? Whether it's through investing, through education, that's something that is a big unknown to me. But I wrote this paper. I've a background in finance and as well as engineering. So I made a financial model, and I estimate that the Guatemalan adoptee community, meaning people that are adopted and then our parents, have about a net worth of about $40 billion, give or take, globally, which I think is about 50 to 60% of the Guatemalan annual GDP in 20. Well, it's 66% in 2020. I think it was about 50% in 2021. So it's a sizable chunk of capital that is existing with Guatemalan citizens. And what does that mean in the next 15 to 20 years when you know those of us who are entrepreneurs have created businesses, uh, and yeah, so kind of one of the ways that I've started to enact that and work on that is I've invested in a company in Guatemala, and it was a big step figuring out how to get all my passport, my tax ID number, registering so that I can be an investor there. And I really hope that it can be kind of a pathway for more adoptees who care about our country of Guatemala, who want to see people succeed there. And it's really been fascinating. I've connected with about 5 or 6 other entrepreneurs who are also adopted from Guatemala, who simultaneously have this same desire. And some of them already have companies there in Guatemala that have been established for a couple of years now. Uh, but it's kind of one of these, definitely going on to the unknown. I have no idea how this will work out, but I think it's kind of one of those. I've got to do it. Like, I've got to try it and see what happens, and learn from experience and learn from doing. I don't think I'll be like, there's just kind of a restlessness, like I just thought of this idea, and I've experienced what it's like to invest there and the potential that it can bring to people there.
Learning by doing, I think, is so important. When I was back in education, I think teaching by doing is a great thing. Modeling, showing people the blueprint, showing them the road, because a lot of times when we step into the unknown, we're going on uncharted territory. We're going in an uncharted path. That doesn't mean it's necessarily good or bad. It's just a new path. And that's one of those exciting things, to be the trailblazer. And so I just really wanted to say I commend you for that. And I look forward to seeing where this goes. And, I would love to be involved in some capacity.
Yeah, yeah, that would be great to have you involved. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of us who are adopted from Guatemala who are entrepreneurs, who have companies, and yeah, it's just fascinating. Almost everyone that I've talked to has some sort of interest in either bringing their company back to Guatemala or as an entrepreneur helping. And I just am blown away by that. But I think it's so cool.
Where can people find you? Where can people find adoptees with Guatemalan roots? If they want to learn more about you, or your organization.
So I'm on all my socials are at Ben Fossen, and then you can find adoptees with Guatemalan roots at guateroots.org. And then on socials, we're with Guate Roots. We're on all the major
Well,
social
thanks
media
again,
sites.
Ben. I look forward to talking to you more and seeing how your journey unfolds.
Yeah, and it was a pleasure to be on your podcast here, and really
Thank you
enjoyed
so
our
much.
conversation, Jeremy.